the Hijab 10 discount code for 10% discount on a wide range of products, including premium Ethiopian black seed products.
Okay. Yeah.
Good.
Okay, we're good. Go ahead, Anton.
So, did you grow up in London? And also, I mean, what level of religious would you say that you are?
Well, I think I'm an observant, orthodox, traditionalist Muslim, Sunni, and kind of orientation, if you want to put it that way. And yes, I grew up not really in that. I mean, I grew up in a liberal environment. I grew up here in London. I went to a multicultural school. I actually went to the same school as some very famous people who went to Syria, and which I will
What
not.
kind of famous?
Yeah, not in the positive sense. And I've seen everything, you know, and I've engaged with everyone. And it's really a privileged experience, I think, when you grow up in a deeply multicultural society, and you see people from different perspectives and different backgrounds, and you can get along with them. You learn how to kind of be what you are, be proud of what you are, but at the same time, learn to disagree with people and still get along with them. This is a very important thing. And being in a multicultural society all my life, I think that's been probably one of the biggest takeaways.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think being in a multicultural society forces you to understand that there are a multitude of perspectives, and you need to kind of find, like you said, a middle ground between what all of you think and try and work out what is a way that you can find harmony in terms of interacting with these other groups and all find out your positive aspects.
Exactly.
Within that diversity, when you were growing up, were there many Jewish people that you knew?
Yes. I actually live in a Jewish area.
Which area did you grow up in?
St. John's Wood.
Ah.
So yeah,
Northwest London
I've lived there
part.
for 20 years. So I've lived in this. Of course, we have Jewish neighbours. We have people that Jewish people that went to my school. Jewish people that I grew up with. I knew the rabbis and the synagogues and so on. Yeah, we have one of the biggest and most important synagogues in the vicinity, so in the area. So yeah, absolutely. And of course, what I realised about Jewish people is that they're very similar to the Muslim community, in so much as we think that Jewish people have a uniformity of opinions, but they don't. There are liberal Jews, there are Orthodox Jews, and within the Orthodox spectrum, you have Haredi, you have Hasidic, and so on and so forth. It subcompartmentalizes it, and there's category after category, and so it's not a monolithic entity. And this is a very important thing.
Yeah.
I think people need to understand when they're discussing Jewish people, because it's not a monolithic entity, and that's what I've discovered really quickly. It was something that growing up I didn't understand, but now I'm fully aware of.
Well, I think people lose that nuance generally. There is almost no monolithic group out there. There's a spectrum within every single group, and
Exactly.
it's much easier for people to generalise and then make a sweeping statement on the basis of that generalisation, which I think can most often be problematic. And you've got to look for the nuance and things.
Absolutely.
But when you say you were growing up and you didn't know that, what was your perception of Judaism when you were growing up before you educated yourself? What did you think about Jews, or what did you know about Jews?
Well, to be honest with you, Judaism as a religion we always knew was one of the closest religions to the religion of Islam. Obviously, we have to delineate Jewishness into two subcompartments. You've got the ethnic component and you've got the religious component. But if we're talking about the religious component, then we've always known that Judaism stands as one of the closest religions to the religion of Islam, because both religions are, uncompromisingly monotheistic, right? There's only one God worthy of worship. Both religions speak about Abraham, obviously, and all the prophets like Noah and all this kind of thing in the Bible, in the Quran, and the Old Testament, or the Hebrew Bible, as the Jews or Jewish clergy prefer. And obviously both religions believe in the Ten Commandments, and Moses as well, which to Muslims is one of the most mighty messengers, most important men of humankind. And in fact, he's mentioned in the Quran more than Muhammad is. He's mentioned in the Quran more than any other prophet is mentioned. He's mentioned 70 times by name in the Quran. And so the stories of the Quran will be very much similar to the stories in the Old Testament. However, with one, I would say, key difference. The key difference being, where in the Old Testament you could kind of summarize the main message being, let my people go. Right? The Quran doesn't state that that's the main thing. The Quran states that when Moses came to the people of Israel, that the main thing was he was trying to get them to believe, Pharaoh himself to believe. And it wasn't about let my people go, it's about believe in one God and save yourself. It wasn't an exclusivist discourse for a tribe or something, let my people go. No, there was that as well, let my people go, yes. But the most important thing is believe in one God and worship him. And that's something that runs through all the stories of the Quran. But to kind of answer your question, we've always known that the proximity between kind of Judaism as a religion and Islam on the fundamentals is quite close, and that there are many things in terms of our practices, like Orthodox Jewish practice, eating pork, or obviously lack thereof, it's haram, it's not kosher. We can eat kosher food. We used to actually grow up on kosher meat because it was much more, well, maybe you shouldn't say this, but better quality than the halal alternative, right? So it's things like that.
Can say that.
Yeah, I can say. And so, things like that we were aware of. But clearly as well, there's an aspect of politics. But to be honest, in my household, there was always a distinction that was made between Zionism as a political ideology and Judaism as a religion. And so I've always known that even since I was young. But once again, I didn't know the subcompartments and the extent of diversity until I got a bit older.
So was Israel something that was discussed in your household growing up?
Yes, no doubt about it. I mean, I'm Egyptian by I'm background. Obviously, I'm a British Egyptian, and so the wars, the 48 war, the 66, 67 war, and obviously 73 war in particular. 73 is hailed in Egypt as a great victory for Egypt. Obviously, what we know about that was that Sadat actually he politically compromised. Okay, and it's interesting to note that in Egyptian culture, this is seen as one of the great victories, even though it was predicated on a negotiation. So, which is actually, in many ways, is something good to think about, because that is to say that people want peace in the Arab world, people want peace in the Muslim world. They don't want to be in perpetual conflict with their Jewish neighbor, or their Israeli neighbor, or their Israeli neighbor. So that is something that definitely was there. When I went to Egypt, we have bridges that are named 6 October or the 6th of October bridge.
Or in commemoration.
Things like that. So that was definitely part of the culture. So growing up, it was a staple part of the culture. And
so is Israel seen sort of as a boogeyman, kind of?
It was, to be honest with you, right? When I was growing up, the kind of internal conflicts within Egypt started to override the discourse. And, that was overshadowing, eclipsing the historical issues. If I grew up in the 80s or the 70s, I think the situation would have been a little bit different. Yeah,
that's true. And so, from your perspective, how does the discussion around Israel affect how people think about Jewish people? Do you think it does have an effect on how people think about Jewish people?
I think really this is a sociological question. If we're being completely honest, it's like whether it does or not it can be a historical question. In terms of, if we look at the broad kind of stroke situation from 1945 onwards, or 1948 to be completely precise, the establishment of the State of Israel, and how the Arab nations reacted to that, how Muslim nations reacted to that, it's going to be a very difficult case for someone to suggest that there was no level of anti-Semitism that emerged in the Arab or Muslim world as a result of the establishment of the State of Israel. I do think that, to be honest with you, if we're looking at a broad stroke historical perspective, that this kind of anti-Semitism is very particular. It's not an anti-Semitism that existed in Spain, where where scholars talk about lack of eventia, or the idea of a mutual coexistence between Jews, Muslims, and Christians, or even the Ottoman Empire. I think it's particularly pernicious, and I think it's particularly outrageous, actually, because it's now effectively mixed political discourse with religious discourse in a way that didn't exist in the past. I think that can be said historically, but in terms of, if you're talking about the UK discourse and the UK kind of life and so on, that requires kind of sociological research. And to be fair, the kind of studies that we have so far on Jewish communities and Muslim communities, it's difficult for me to make a comment about that. But what should be the case is, I think it's wholly important to distinguish between Jewishness and being an Israeli supporter or being a Zionist. And if we don't make this distinction, I think there will be some real problems that can emerge.
Well, sorry to refer to you directly, Ali. In the video, which I think you were also included in, isn't the title of your video "Muslims Confront Radical Israelis"?
Yes.
And isn't that doing exactly what you're saying shouldn't be done? Conflating a group of Jewish people in Britain and calling them Israelis, isn't that doing exactly what you're saying you shouldn't do?
I mean, if someone identifies as an Israeli supporter, an apologist, or a pro-Zionist, right, then they have already shown their cards. What we're saying is that there is a difference between Israeli discourse or pro-Israeli discourse. When we say that, we mean those who are sympathetic or apologetic to the policies of the Israeli government, policies which have seen the death of 166 civilians recently, of which 66 of them were children. These policies, the policies of blockade, the policies of settlement in the West Bank, in Sheikh Jarrah, in these things. If we decide to oppose these policies, okay, that should never be conflated with anti-Jewishness. And I think the reason why is very clear, that if we do that, that will render those anti-Zionist Jews as impossible subjects that are engaged in a perpetual self-flagration of some sort, self-treachery, self-hate of some sort. They become an impossible subject. But we know these people exist. And in fact, according to the definition of the British government, which on anti-Semitism, which was published in 2016, one of the definitions of anti-Semitism is when you hold Jewish people responsible for the actions of the Israeli government. And I think doing that conflation puts at risk people being anti-Semitic. And so it's very important that if someone is an apologist for Israel or for Zionism, that should be outlined and delineated, or otherwise completely separated from Jewishness. I think is very important.
I completely agree with you, to be honest, on almost every single point. Do you not think the title of that video, for example, and I mean, maybe I don't want to get into it in this way, but can you first of all tell me what it was that you did in Golders Green and what made you feel compelled to go and do that?
When we went to Stanford Hill and Golders Green, we were looking for our allies and associates, because we have many allies, pro-Palestine, anti-Zionist allies and associates, many of which are on the record with us, holding hands in placards and so on, and showing their disdain for the policies of the Israeli government. And I think it's very important to give these people a voice, because it does exactly what we were talking about in the beginning. It gives diversity to the Jewish community. The Jewish community are not a monolith, and there are a significant, sizable chunk of the Jewish community who see no connection whatsoever with being Jewish and support for Israel. In fact, this was published in one of the only studies that was done, 2010. I think it's 2010, where about 4,000 Jews were questioned, and a sizable population saw no necessary link at all of Jewish people between support for Israel and Jewishness. These are not my words. These are the sociological findings of the Jewish policy, the Institute for Jewish Policy, in 2010. So I think here, once again, it's imperative, especially where maybe right-wing media, organizations and so on, are reluctant to do so, or even, to be honest, centrist media streams are reluctant to do so, that we give voice to these voiceless pro-Palestinian Jewish people who represent a big part of the Jewish community.
But can you, literally in layman's terms, can you explain to me what it was that you guys went out and did that day? Just so we can...
Right, so what we did was we went to our rabbi friends, we went to many of our associates from the Jewish community to condemn the actions of the Israeli government at that time, which were indiscriminately killing civilian populations in Gaza. They were dropping bombs on houses, killing people. 66 of them are children, actually, and we thought that was disgusting. And to be fair, we did unfortunately confront some people, which we were ready to confront.
Had you organised it with the rabbis to go down there? And so so you went down to Golders Green and Stanford Hill. This was
a day of where there was protest. So it was already organized. Everything was already organized by organizers. And those rabbis, by the way, they are part of a panel of ours, and they are part of the decision making. Pardon?
Are these the Neturei Carter rabbis?
Is that right? Yep.
That is nice.
Yep. So yeah.
But so you drove to Golden. So you went from one to the other.
Yeah, we went to about 10 different locations that day.
And was that all with the van, which was, I think, was it projecting
pictures
of the Holocaust and then pictures of the
this van is not, just to be clear, this van is not our van. It's not. We don't own that van. This van and the pictures, once again, the pictures of that van were chosen by a panel of people, of which those pro-Palestinian anti-Zionist Jews were part of that panel. And some of the imagery of that van, we objected to it. We said we don't really, I think this is quite antagonistic. But they said, look, this is the kind of thing we're seeing in the academic discourse. Norman Finkelstein himself wrote a book called The Holocaust Industry. And it's important, they said, that we remind Jews, this was their case, that we remind Jews that we don't want to fall, we don't want to be the victim of our own past. We said, if you feel strongly about that, we cannot stop you from expressing.
So they drove the van?
Not drove the van. They had a driver or something.
They organised.
Oh, absolutely. This is not our van in any way, shape, or form. But there was a panel of people, of which they were part of that panel, and they decided on the pictures. And we spoke about it. We were a little bit, a bit worried about the kind of imagery and the kind of. But they said, yeah, this should be said in that language, in that strong language. So because this is our view. The view is that we have suffered one of the most catastrophic and monstrous and condemnable and abominable things in human history, which is the Holocaust. And we should teach our upcoming generations that we cannot even go anywhere near doing that to another population. Not to say that there is some kind of comparison, there is not. But having said that, they said there is no comparison in the size and scale of these things. But we don't even want to come close to that with a barge pole.
Weren't you worried about it being antagonistic? Shouldn't you have told them really to not come? Because if there's no comparison, there's a risk if you're doing it in front of their van, showing those images, that people might misconstrue and feel that you are making a direct comparison.
There is a risk. Of course, there is a risk. But the thing is, I don't think that pro-Zionist or people that are apologetic to the Israeli narrative or the Israeli government, in fact, that those individuals should be protected. I think that if they are willing enough and brave enough to scrutinize or to defend, I should say, to defend their government's policies or the government that they support's policies, they should be brave enough to be cross-examined, scrutinized, or otherwise interrogated publicly as well. And I think what it is that we've got to remember that in Israel there was the status law in 1952, which categorically states, and it's still part of the books, the legislative books, which categorically states that Israel is the creation of the Jewish people, all the Jewish people. But this, again, monolithic kind of narrative doesn't give flavor to the Jewish community. There's no diversity there. This is the problem narrative. And what we're saying is that there are some Jews out there, as you know and I know, that will condemn Israel with all vehemency and all vigor. And they will condemn them in language which may be antagonistic to me and you, or me particularly because I'm non-Jewish. But I say, give them a voice, because they deserve a voice, and they've been blocked by members of their own community. Not all members, but some members, some intolerant members of their own community, we all have them. From having that voice, we will provide the voice for them.
And what was the reaction that you got to publishing that video?
Well, we got a mixed reaction. We've got some people saying this was exceptionally well done, and it was needed, and this is the kind of thing we need, and ruffling the feathers as part of public discourse and as part of freedom of speech and expression and so on. And we have some people saying this is antagonism, this is stirring, division and so on. And this is the nature of public discourse, I think. If we're going to have any discussion whatsoever, if it doesn't accumulate or generate some kind of controversy, usually we're talking about some mundane issue, which maybe isn't worth talking about in the first place. But if this is one of the pieces of collateral damage that you get from doing freedom of speech properly.
But as someone, I mean, so much of what you're saying I agree with, and I think one of the things you clearly are passionate about promoting is a sense of harmony.
Yes.
How does it make you feel then that literally direct accusations of anti-Semitism were laid at your door on the basis of what you...
I think they were saying that I was stoking it. But this is, once again, you have to appreciate that there are some people that conflate anti-Israelism, if you want to call it that, or anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. We're saying that conflation itself is anti-Semitic, according to the British definition of British governmental definition. The British government itself has laid down a definition which has been accepted by the bulk of organizations in the West, Jewish organizations, which is that to equate the government's actions, the Israeli government's actions, with Jewish people is anti-Semitism. They're telling me that In fact, if what you do is you attack the Israeli government and you attack the policies, the discriminatory policies and the attacking policies of the Israeli government, then you're anti-Semitic. We're saying that you're more likely to fit the category of anti-Semitic according to the British government because you're making the conflation, not us.
Is it not implicitly accusatory going to an area with a large Jewish community with the backdrop which wasn't the backdrop that you guys had decided to bring, and going there and confronting people? Isn't it? I mean, it's subtle, but isn't that implicitly quite?
I'll tell you what it's like.
Anti-Semitic.
I'll tell you what it's like. It's the Human Rights Watch have categorized Israel as an apartheid state. You know that. It's on the public record, and not just them, many different organizations which have nothing to do with Islam or Muslim community. Now, had I and you maybe been around at the time of the South African apartheid, and there was a white South African community in Britain and London, and had I gone with my cameras and said, I want to rally support against apartheid from these people, if they were to say this is anti or racial towards South Africans, I would say that itself is an affront to freedom of speech and to freedom in general. Because if I'm against an apartheid system and I want to rally support and get associates from the community, which are probably most powerful in being able to make a case, that if that is anti-Semitic, then they have distorted and defamed or even completely destroyed what it means to be anti-Semitic. What we have to go back to are robust definitions which don't violate the terms. Anti-Semitic is when you have certain attitudes towards Jewish people, and there's a whole definition that you can find in the British government website. It's nothing to do with someone being critical of Israel or going to any area in London, which doesn't belong to any community, by the way, because it's a free country, going to any area in London and rallying support from any member of any community. And that includes the Muslim community, the black community, the Hispanic community, or any other community. If I go to those communities and I ask them, listen, we have a cause, and it's a pro-Palestinian cause, it's an anti-Israel government cause, would you like to join this cause? I have a full right to do that, and I think it's totally legitimate for any community.
Is there not a risk? I mean, lots of debates get brought down by associations with things that they don't want to be associated with. Didn't you run the risk of doing that? I'm mainly thinking of the van, because if you're going there and you're confronting people with images, and you can make an assumption that a lot of the people in that area will have had family who perished in the Holocaust, you were associating yourself with that van just by virtue of being alongside it. Wasn't that problematic? Did that not put you off wanting to do it? Or did you not want to draw a line and say...
The van itself is not my property. It's got nothing to do with me. And the pictures on the van, as I said, were chosen by Jewish people. Now, if Jewish people want to talk about the Holocaust, they can talk about the Holocaust. If black people want to use the N-word, they can use the N-word. I'm not against this. I think that being against this would be to censor, you see, those people. What I do believe in is free speech when it's done not for gratuitously insulting populations, for finding the truth. And I think that if we're going to a community like the Jewish community, they are sensible enough and mature enough to be able to conduct free speech, which is not breaking the law, not inciting violence, not doing any of those things. They're sensible enough, and that's why we have so many allies in that community. If you go on our public platform, you will find so many Jewish people holding hands and placards with us. Why would they do that? Stanford Bridge itself, I think I would even wager that the majority of Stanford Bridge, I don't know, I mean, I haven't done a survey, but potentially the majority of them share our types of attitudes towards the pro-Palestinian cause. So what I think is that you're saying it runs a risk. Of course it does. I mean, would it have run a risk for some anti-slavery advocates in the 19th century to come out and speak about slavery? Yes. Did it run a risk for them? They went into war in 1861 to 1865 in America for it. Did it run a risk for people that anti-apartheid people against the South African apartheid, for them to be labelled in certain ways? Yes. But those individuals who are happy to take that risk and go forward with it and don't care about labels, especially when they're being misapplied, those are the ones who make history. Those who are too afraid to do these things, they will meet the dustbin of history, the trash heap of history. And I don't mind being labelled, and this is I don't mind being labelled as whatever it is. I'm a Semite myself. I'm an Arab. And vernacularly, I'm a Semite myself. If they want to label me, I tell you one thing: label me all you like, because you know why? Because I know it's impossible for a Muslim to be anti-Semitic. The Prophet married a Jew. And in fact, not only did he marry an ethnic Jew, the Prophet Muhammad, Safiya bint Huyay, he married an ethnic Jew, But he even armed her with ways in which she can combat anti-Semitism in her own community, telling her to mention her lineage back to Moses and Aaron and so on.
I personally think that's a bit of a fluff argument, because you can't say it's impossible for someone to be anything, because quite clearly.
No, for a traditionalist Muslim.
So you're saying within the
my
actual
paradigm.
Following.
Well, I'm saying that if my prophet, and I'm a Muslim, has married a Jewish woman, okay, ethnically Jewish,
yeah,
and he gave her arguments for people that were being abusive to her to combat anti-Semitism in her own community. If I am being a faithful follower of the Prophet Muhammad, I surely should follow in his footsteps. And that's the kind of thing I have on my channel. If anyone goes on online now on my channel, they'll find a video entitled "Why Muslims Cannot Be Anti-Semitic or Shouldn't Be Anti-Semitic." The reason why is because Islamically, if we're following the Prophet Muhammad, he married a Jew himself, and he gave her arguments on how to combat anti-Semitism. So I'm not saying it's inconceivable. I'm saying it oughtn't not
be.
Yeah,
it shouldn't be.
Yeah, it shouldn't be the case.
Be.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I can understand that. Can I draw a fairly crude comparison? Do you think would it in theory be offensive for somebody to go to a large Muslim population part of London and have a van with pictures of, for example, the Kabul airport where ISIS-K recently had caused an explosion, and to demand of people that they give their opinion and outwardly condemn it? Would you think that was problematic?
I think it's a disanalogous thing, because if we look at the studies, the one I've just mentioned to you, the Dr. David Graham study, okay, in 2010, which has been conducted by 4,000 Jews. I think it's one of the biggest studies, and it's been conducted by the Jewish Institute Policy Institute. This study did say that there was a sizable number of Jewish people that support the state of Israel. And in fact, they base their Jewish identity based on the state of Israel. The same thing cannot and ever be said about Muslims and ISIS. You'll not find the level of support.
Are you saying they feel a connection to Israel, or they are supportive of the Israeli government's actions? Because those are two different things.
No, not the Israeli government. Israel as a nation. What I'm saying is now, if there are people that are supportive of Israel as a nation and the government, that is different to ISIS, because it's not a like-for-like comparison in terms of the demography there. There are simply not as many Muslims who support ISIS as there are Jews who support Israel. That's impossible to... Yeah. If you look at Pew, for example, and see the kind of the data they have on how many Muslims support ISIS in all the nations, including the Muslim majority nations, it's not comparable to the amount of Jews that support ISIS, Israel, or the actions of the Israeli government. So I think it's a bit of a disanalogy there.
But it's a similar thing in terms of expecting people thousands of miles away from the actual conflict itself or issue to answer for it as if they have a personal statement.
No, once again, we're not doing that. We went to these areas to get our associates and our allies from the Jewish community to have a voice. So it wasn't answer. It wasn't interrogative. It was more conciliatory and harmonious. We're going to see our Jewish friends in these Jewish areas. If there happens to be pro-Zionists who came to us and challenged us, we are ready to debate them and defeat them in debate, as we have been. And the only thing that they can come back with is labeling us as anti-Semites. That is, for me, an admission of defeat, because that you can't deal with our argument, therefore you have to label us. So as far as we're concerned, okay, it's legitimate. Even what you've said there is legitimate. If you wanted, if BBC or any other news agency came to any area in the world, forget about just London, any area in the world, they wanted to ask anyone about anything, I think they should have the sociological privilege to do so that we know what people are thinking, what people are saying. I think it's not an affront to freedom of speech. It's in fact within the spirit and letter and the law of freedom of speech and expression. And if we can't do these things, then there is no such thing as freedom of speech. What is freedom? It boils down to what then? It's a freedom of speech so long as we don't hurt someone else's feelings. Then in that case, I think people need to reassess their principles.
Can I draw back a little bit?
Yep.
Do you think Islamophobia as an issue is something that's taken as seriously as anti-Semitism as an issue?
No, because the government has a working definition for anti-Semitism. It does not have a working definition for Islamophobia. The government, the UK government, the Conservative UK government has a page-long definition, in fact, of what constitutes anti-Semitism, of which, by the way, there are religious things. Because one may make the argument it's disanalogous, because they would say that Jewishness is both ethnic and religious, right? Whereas Islam is only religious. Right, but then in the definition where anti-Semitism is, the definition of anti-Semitism, there are religious components of the religious, the infrastructure, the organizations and so on. So if Jewish people are allowed to have a definition, and religious Jewish people are allowed to have a definition which protects them in the law, then Muslim people should have it. Now, obviously it's different because, as I've mentioned, when we're talking about discrimination towards Muslim people, it's multifactorial in sociological analysis. If you have a black Muslim, right, so they could be discriminated against on the basis of being black, as well as on the basis of being Muslim, and these two types of discrimination are two separate types. I'm not saying one is worse than the other or whatever, but it's just a separate type of analysis. And I think when we're doing these analyses, we have to be careful not to disanalogize, but also be careful to be consistent, because in this case, if there are aspects here which in the British definition of anti-Semitism are religious, surely there should be separate things for all the religions, not just Islam, Hinduism, Judaism, Sikhism, all of them.
Why do you think it isn't given as much?
To be honest, that's a political question. Are the Conservative Party concerned with the Muslim community? No, they don't see, maybe from a voting perspective, that the Muslim community is going to vote for them in the first place. So they may not want to please them as much as maybe they have a stronger hold in Jewish communities in terms of voting. It might be that. The Labour Party has traditionally had the Muslim vote, but now with Starmer moving in the direction that he's moving in, which is, from our perspective, a anti-Muslim direction, quite frankly, he's likely to lose the Muslim vote himself. So whatever happens, I think that political parties now need to start thinking more wisely, because we are, according to the census data, we are millions of people in this country. We are millions of people in this country. And if we are not taken seriously, then we'll be worse and worse things will happen. Disunity will happen. And we want to create harmony in this country with Muslims, because we are millions in this country. And I think that the way to do so is to protect our interests. And the more Muslims feel that their interests are being protected, the less there's likely to be radicalization, there's likely to be disunity, there's likely to be disharmony, there's likely to be all these kind of things. So I think it is important that the government come forward with a definition, as they have with anti-Semitism, for Islamophobia.
How do you think we can promote a sense of harmony between different communities, specifically with the Jewish community in mind?
I think that we really need to just bring people together. If you look at the Pew data, okay, Pew data is very interesting because it's really seen as the gold standard of statistical data. If you look at the Pew data where discrimination is at its highest, whether it's racial, whatever it may be, in different countries, you'll find that it's usually in areas where people don't mix, you see. So a problem for both the Muslim and Jewish community has been, maybe you could argue, a lack of integration, a lack of mixing, a lack of having their own kind of ghettos or whatever it is. What we need to do is we need to bring people together from different religions, let them play football or something, let them eat together, let them talk together. And if there are disagreements between Muslims and Jews, they should be fleshed out. But they should be fleshed out in a healthy manner with an eye or an intention to try and create unity and promote civic coexistence, rather than with an eye to try and create disunity and disharmony. I think if we do that properly, then I think we'll find that this country will be the beacon of light for the rest of the countries and actually a model on how to deal with the issue of multiculturalism.
Are you optimistic? Do you think that's the direction the country's going in?
Let me tell you something. I think that there's a lot of reason why we should be optimistic. In history, and as I say, one of my academic areas of research has been history, convivencia has happened between Muslims and Jews in the past. The issue has always been the politics. After 1948, everything has changed, but we can bring it back. We can. I am optimistic. I'm hopeful. We can bring it back to a situation where we can bring Muslims and Jews back on civil terms with each other. I'm not saying they're not already on those terms, but on better terms with each other in this country. And I think if we have the hard discussions and we don't label each other, because people can't fear that I'm going to speak to my Jewish neighbor and he's going to call me an anti-Semite, or vice versa. The Jews fear being called an Islamophobe, and it just becomes a very toxic relationship. No, let's have our discussions. You know, and if we don't fear that and we talk about it, then there's a great hope. If we do resort to these kind of defensive, deflective, scapegoating tactics, then it's going to be something negative for the community. So yes, I am optimistic, generally speaking.
This is just a broader identity question.
Yes.
Do you, in terms of your own beliefs, do you think of yourself as, are you progressive? Where do you sit in terms of your social outlook?
I think, to be honest with you, the word progressive has overtones or presuppositions which are really objectionable, actually, because they come from an Enlightenment, Western Enlightenment experience, which is entirely Eurocentric, and which has very specific kind of values in mind. I think what I consider myself is a traditionalist Muslim. That's how I call myself. And I think that in many ways, people not understanding traditionalist Islam, that think that this type of Islam, if you like, requires some kind of evolution, okay, are themselves subscribing to a discourse which is, in my view, actually racial, colonial and racial, because it's the same mentality that colonizers had before they went into countries which didn't belong to theirs and imposed their values. So I object to the term altogether. I think progressive, understood in Western language, or in the West generally speaking, has overtones in it which are entirely objectionable. And not only objectionable, they require to be evidence from first principles. They are not argued for thoroughly, and they are assumptions that are presented as axioms which we don't need to accept.
I'm sorry to bring you back into this, Ali, I'm sorry. But
just give me credit, please.
I think there's a lot of merit to what you say, but I think specifically that video did strike me as problematic in lots of ways. And I think specifically the title of the video, Muslims Confront Radical Israelis, was problematic. And I think it was possibly a shock tactic headline in order to get more views, in order to promote what is possibly you want a harmonious message.
Yes.
But do you not see how that is problematic?
There are radical Israelis.
And do you think there's a different way of communicating?
What I mean is, you're objecting to the term radical Israeli. Are there such things as radical Iranians? Are there such things as radical Koreans?
No, but I'm objecting to radical Israelis because you went to speak to just some, fairly religious Jewish people who are British people. They are certainly, you definitely don't know if they're Israelis.
No. They identified as such, and not only that.
I didn't see a single person in that video identify
there was
themselves
more than one,
as an Israeli.
There was more than one video. You have to look at all of the videos.
Did any of them say,
yes.
My passport?
Yes. We're dual nationalists. They said that we are dual nationalist Israelis.
That very much isn't in the video.
No, that's that video, but there's a collection of videos. You have to look at all of them. But there's something else here I want to say. That not only did they do that, if you watch the entire video, when we talked about why we call that person radical, is because they totally humiliated children that were being killed, Palestinian children, and there's something to the effect that was they deserved it, or they did it to themselves. They did it to themselves, that he said. So we think someone who identifies as a dual nationalist. And who trivializes the death of Palestinian children, says they did it to themselves, is a radical. I think if that's not a radical, then we don't know what radical is.
Yeah, one of them said, you saw on a billboard, is this Afghanistan?
Yeah, is this Afghanistan? Yeah.
What's funny is
he's walking with his children as well.
I said, man, if that was your kids,
Yeah.
I would be the first to speak, and you're like, mocking. Well, this is Afghanistan, like, mocking.
Yeah.
But I'd worry that there's a little bit of inconsistency, which I'm sure you know there's going to be consistency, because you can't. I don't know. You can't, you can't choose who your followers are. You can't. There's going to be nuance and everything. But isn't there inconsistency in trying to promote a message of positivity and then maybe focusing in on only a negative outlet? So I think the video you're referring to is the gent who, what did he say? Is this Afghanistan?
Yeah.
They did it
themselves.
Yeah.
But was that the majority view you were getting when you went there? And if it's
Well,
not, are you then not kind of giving an inconsistently or a disproportionately large spotlight to something which isn't representative of how the people you came across?
No. What I would say is go and look at our platforms, because you'll find both. You'll find we are confronting people who are pro-Zionists. We are also literally in hand with people who are Jewish, anti-Zionist, anti-Israeli government actions advocates. So we do both, and that's unfortunately something I have to say the BBC haven't done enough of. Something that I say that the BBC, if they did more of, it would be more authentic journalism. I think the truth of the matter is, what we've done, if we are exposing some bad attitudes in certain communities, whether it's Muslim or Jewish or Christian or whatever kind of community we're talking about, that needs to be exposed to some extent. That does need to be, because how can we fix a problem that we don't even know exists? We need to X-ray, okay? We need to put under the proverbial MRI, our communities, and not just try and kind of whitewash or put under the carpet the problems that we may have in our respective communities. We need to deal with them head on. Like I said, if it was South African apartheid, if it was a white South African community of white South Africans, and there was apartheid going on, going there and seeing, for example, some people agree with apartheid, and then someone come and tell me, why are you broadcasting this? I say, this is the problem, we need to expose it. See, this is the problem, we need to expose it. And I know it can be kind of uncomfortable for us. I know it because I'm a Muslim. We see it on the news all the time. We see people doing bad things in the name of Islam all the time. I know it's uncomfortable, but it's sometimes a necessary uncomfort. And sometimes it's something we need to deal with. Because if we pretend it doesn't exist, there's no such thing as Muslim terrorists, there's no such thing as racist Jews, there's no such thing as Muslim whatever. If we think all of those categories are in fact not even in existence, then we can't fix those things in our communities.
I mean, 1 second, Mohammed, you have a little bit of drops in your
blurring your left
glasses.
eye. Left eye.
Yeah,
left eye. Left eye's got.
Is it? Shall I clean it or shall I just leave it?
Can you? Is it okay if you to
Yeah.
just?
Or is it just going to get worse as we go?
Because I'm picking them up very much with the camera.
It might get worse before it gets
yeah,
better.
we need to maybe just wrap up, guys. Like soon.
Okay, it's getting worse.
Yeah, it's fine.
I'm waterproof, but I'm not sure the camera's waterproof.
Let me come here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Better?
Yeah.
Can I carry on?
Yeah. Let's start wrapping up.
Sure. Can you understand? I mean, I'm not going to wade into Israeli politics and the issue of Israel because it's just so complicated generally. I've got personal opinions on it all. But can you understand why for many Jewish people it's very complicated? It's not easy for them to outright condemn Israel. Can you understand that perspective? But based on their own sensitivities, their own history, can you see why it's complicated for them?
Yeah, I totally sympathise with Jewish people who have an affinity to the state of Israel. I understand that perspective. It's not like it's an alien perspective to me. And I empathise with them. But I just think they're wrong on the issues. Because when we're looking at right and wrong, right, I think all of us agree that the indiscriminate killing of children, of civilian populations, dropping bombs in a densely populated place as Gaza, which has been there's a blockade on it. Okay, I think that should be condemned by anybody from any religion. Just like I would be expected to condemn the actions of whatever country is that claims to speak in behalf of Islam, Iran, Saudi Arabia, whoever. I'll condemn any action that they do, even though I have an affinity to Islam and so on. I'll condemn any action that they do in the name of my religion, because in fact, my failure to do so would be a discredit to the religion itself. I think it would be a disservice to my community and my religion if I don't condemn those actions. And I think the same thing can be said of individuals who support the state of Israel, who do not condemn outright the actions of a government who drop bombs indiscriminately in the most densely populated area in the world.
This is such a broad political question, but what resolution would you like to see in that part of the world? What would you like to see happen?
This is a very difficult question. What I would like to see is
question. If we knew the answer, no.
What I would like to see is coexistence. What I would like to see is what we saw in Spain. What I would like to see is convivencia. What I would like to see is tolerance. But what I'm probably going to see is all the opposite to that, unfortunately. Right? I don't have an optimistic view of what's going to happen in that area. Anyone who looks at the history of that area will know that there is no resolution that's probably going to be had in the foreseeable future. I have to be honest and say all I can do here is pray.
Okay, guys.